For 19 years, Catalina Reyes scrubbed the floors of the eclipsed moon Pac's mansion deep in the Sierra Madre. Treated with less consideration than a stray dog, she was the Omega without a wolf, the broken one, the useless one. But they didn't know the secret in her bloodline. They didn't know that her silence was not weakness, but a seal waiting to be broken. The great hall of the mansion smelled of pine, beeswax, and the metallic scent of anticipation. It was the eve of the Winter Solstice Ball, the most significant event on the werewolf calendar, where alphas from neighboring territories would gather to forge alliances and, more importantly, find their destined mates. Catalina was on her knees, scrubbing a stain on the marble floor with a brush whose bristles had long since lost their stiffness. Her hands were red and rough, the skin around her knuckles cracked from the harsh soap. She was 19, an age when most wolves had already transformed and found their place in the pack hierarchy. But Catalina was different. She was the wolfless, the Omega who had never heard the voice of her inner beast. She kept her head down, scrubbing harder when she heard footsteps approaching. She would recognize that sound anywhere, the confident walk of Valentina Torres, daughter of the pack's beta. Valentina was tall, stunning, with dark brown hair that fell in perfect waves, and she carried herself as if she were already the Luna of the pack. Valentina's voice dripped with sweet venom when she spoke, stopping beside Catalina. She criticized the cleaning work, reminding Catalina that Alpha Diego wanted all the silverware in the banquet hall polished before the first guest arrived. When Catalina dared to mention that the employees had been promised they could watch from the balcony, Valentina laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that attracted the attention of other Omegas passing by with trays of champagne. The humiliation didn't stop there. Valentina kicked the bucket of soapy water, sending a gray wave across the floor Catalina had just cleaned. The instructions were clear: clean everything again and don't dare show up near the ballroom. The threat of being thrown into the cells hung in the air as Valentina walked away, her hips swaying arrogantly. Catalina fought back the tears that burned her eyes. Crying showed weakness, and weakness in the pack of the eclipsed moon was a death sentence. She was the orphan of a low-ranking warrior and a human woman, or so she had been told. Her parents had died when she was a baby, in circumstances that were never fully explained. The former Alpha had taken her in out of pity, but after he was gone, his son Diego Mendoza had taken command. Diego. Just thinking his name made Catalina's heart beat painfully against her ribs. He was arrogant, powerful, and completely indifferent to her existence. However, over the last month, every time he entered a room, Catalina felt a strange magnetic pull in her stomach, a warmth she couldn't explain. She prayed to the moon goddess that it wasn't what she thought. An Omega like her couldn't be destined for an Alpha like him. It would be a curse, not a blessing. Catalina wiped the floor again, her movements mechanical. She had to hurry. Even if she couldn't watch from the balcony, she had to see him just once. This was the night Diego would turn 22, the night his true mate would likely be revealed. If it was Valentina, Catalina knew her life there was over. By the time she finally finished polishing all the silverware, the sun had set. The mansion vibrated with music, violins and cellos hummed through the floorboards. She retired to her small room in the attic, a glorified closet with a cot and a single round window. She stripped off her damp cleaning uniform and looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror. She was small, too thin from skipping meals to avoid the bullies in the cafeteria. Her hair, a shade of blonde so pale it looked like winter wheat, was messy and dull. Her eyes were her only striking feature, a violet so deep that they sometimes looked black. She whispered to herself that it would just be a peek. She pulled out a dress she had rescued from the donation box 3 years ago, a simple navy blue dress, slightly large in the bust, but clean. She pinned her hair back and left the staff quarters, using the hidden corridors within the walls that only the cleaning staff knew about. She reached the ventilation grate that led to the grand ballroom. The sight took her breath away. Dripping crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over hundreds of people. The women wore silk and velvet dresses, the men were in impeccable tuxedos. The air was thick with the scent of rain, cedar, rose, and musk, the pheromones of hundreds of powerful wolves. And there, seated on the dais, was Alpha Diego Mendoza. He was magnificent. He had dark hair combed back from a sharp, aristocratic face and eyes the color of the stormy sea. He looked bored, swirling a glass of amber whiskey, while Valentina, dressed in a bright red dress that left little to the imagination, whispered something in his ear. Catalina's heart pounded. "Don't look at him," she ordered herself. But she couldn't help it. At that very moment, as if sensing her gaze, Diego looked up. His stormy gray eyes fixed on the dark ventilation grill in the shadows of the ceiling. Catalina gasped as a sudden, burning pain tore through her chest. It felt like a hot iron branding her heart. She let out a muffled cry, clutching the grate. Downstairs, Diego dropped his whiskey glass. He stood up abruptly, his hand clutching his chest, his eyes wide with shock. He sniffed the air, his head whipping around, looking directly at the spot where Catalina was hiding. The word he whispered was low, but to a werewolf's hearing, it was like thunder. "Stop." Catalina froze. Denial burned in her mind, but it was too late. Diego roared an order, his voice shaking the chandeliers. "Find her and bring her to me immediately." The guards dragged Catalina out of the ventilation duct. They didn't let her walk. They marched her through the kitchen, past the shocked staff, and pushed her through the double doors of the ballroom. She stumbled, falling to the polished floor in her ill-fitting navy blue dress, her knees scraping against the ground. The music stopped. The silence was deafening. 500 pairs of eyes pierced Catalina. She could smell their revulsion. The rabble. The cleaning girl. A deep voice ordered her to stand up. Catalina trembled as she rose. She couldn't look him in the eye. The attraction was unbearable now. Every cell in her body screamed, "Mate, mate, mate." It was an instinctive desire to submit, to comfort, to be close to him. She looked up. Diego was only a few steps away. Up close, he looked furious. His jaw was clenched so tightly that a muscle twitched in his cheek. He wasn't looking at her with love or adoration. He was looking at her as if she were a stain on his legacy. Valentina stood behind him, her face a mask of shock that quickly turned to malicious triumph. Diego turned to his beta, Valentina's father, questioning whether this was some kind of sick joke. The beta stammered out a response, explaining that the scent was unmistakable, milk and honey, coming from her. Diego turned back to Catalina, invading her space. The bond burned, begging him to touch her, but he fought it with visible revulsion. He spat venomous words, calling her defective, the little mute omega who cleaned his bathrooms. When Catalina whispered his name in response, her voice cracking, Diego growled that he knew exactly what she was, nothing. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Rejecting a mate was taboo, but being destined to an omega without a wolf was humiliation for an alpha of Diego's standing. Catalina pleaded, the pain in her chest throbbing in sync with his anger, saying she hadn't chosen this. But Diego had a choice. He announced it loudly, so the entire court could hear, looking at the visiting dignitaries as his pride swelled to cover his shame. He declared that an alpha needed a Luna who could lead, fight, and bear strong heirs, not a broken vessel. He took a deep breath, his eyes growing cold and dead. The formal words of rejection fell like physical blows. Diego officially declared that he rejected Catalina Reyes as his mate and Luna. The words hit Catalina like a physical blow. She doubled over, a scream tearing from her throat. It wasn't just emotional pain, it was physical agony, as if her soul were being torn in two. The poorly formed bond was shattering. Catalina gasped out the words of acceptance, completing the separation ritual to save them both from madness. Even in her agony, she tried to spare him. But Diego wasn't finished. He wanted to ensure his reputation remained intact. He ordered the guards to escort her to the borders. He would not have a rejected mate roaming his halls, reminding him of the moon goddess's mistake. Banished. The whisper came from the crowd. Banishing an Omega was a sentence few survived. Valentina stepped forward, a cruel smile playing on her lips, ordering them to remove that trash from there. Two burly guards grabbed Catalina by the arms, dragging her backwards. Catalina screamed, her words echoing through the hall as she was dragged away. She begged them not to expel her in winter, that she would have compassion. Diego turned his back on her, taking Valentina's hand and raising it, ordering the music to continue. The ball was to continue as if nothing had happened. The guards dragged Catalina toward the heavy oak doors. The pain in her chest was changing now. It wasn't just the pain of rejection. It was a burning heat starting in the marrow of her bones, feeling like lava running through her veins. When they reached the doors, Catalina's vision turned red. A sound echoed in her mind, not a voice, but a growl. Ancient, deep, furious. The words reverberated in her skull, "They dare." The voice in her head was so loud that Catalina clutched her temples, trying to silence it. The guards threw her onto the snow-covered steps of the mansion. The heavy doors slammed shut, muffling the music and laughter, leaving her in icy darkness. Catalina lay in the snow, curling into a ball. The cold should have numbed her, but she was burning. Her skin felt too tight. Her bones seemed to be cracking and rearranging themselves. She screamed, but it didn't sound like a human scream. It sounded like a howl that tore through the winter night. Inside the ballroom, the music faltered again. A low vibrating hum filled the air, rattling the wine glasses on the tables. Diego paused, looking toward the doors, an expression of uncertainty crossing his face. Outside, Catalina's back arched. The navy blue dress ripped as her spine lengthened. Fur glistening like moonlight on fresh snow burst through her skin. This was no ordinary transformation. Usually, a first transformation was confusing, painful, and resulted in a wolf the size of a large dog. But Catalina kept growing and growing. The seal that had suppressed her wolf for 19 years had been broken by rejection. The pain had acted as a catalyst, shattering the bonds placed on her lineage. She rose to her feet on all fours. She was massive, standing nearly 2 meters tall at the shoulders, dwarfing any alpha wolf. Her fur was not gray or brown, but pure, blinding silver. Her eyes were no longer violet. They were glowing gold, the mark of royalty. Inside the ballroom, the heavy oak doors, reinforced with steel, groaned under pressure. Something massive struck the doors from outside with tremendous force. Valentina screamed, asking what was happening. Another impact shook the doors. The wood splintered. The hinges screamed in protest. Then, with a final crash, the doors burst inward, sending splinters flying like shrapnel. The music died instantly. Screams erupted from the crowd. Through the wreckage, a beast entered. The silver wolf. She lowered her massive head, her golden eyes fixing on Diego. A low growl echoed from her chest, so powerful it cracked the marble floor beneath her paws. The sheer aura of power radiating from the silver wolf forced the omegas and betas in the room to fall to their knees instantly, their instincts screaming to submit. Diego stood frozen, his face pale as death. He stared at the being he had just thrown into the snow, unable to process the transformation. The silver wolf did not attack. She simply opened her mouth and let out a roar that shattered every window in the ballroom. It wasn't just a sound, it was a declaration of existence, an announcement that something ancient and powerful had awakened. The roar echoed through the Sierra Madre mountains, causing snow to fall from trees miles away. And then, from the shadows of the upper balcony, slow, deliberate applause began. The crowd looked up, terrified. There stood a man in a black suit, leaning on the railing. He had been watching all along, a silent presence that no one had noticed until now. It was Rafael Santos, the Alpha King, ruler of all the wolf packs on the continent. He hadn't been seen in public for a decade. Rumors said he had retired to the Fortaleza del Norte in the mountains of Chihuahua, ruling from afar. But there he was, his dark eyes fixed on the silver wolf with an intensity that made the air around him vibrate. Raphael stopped applauding. With a fluid, graceful movement, he leaped over the railing, landing on the floor between the silver wolf and Diego. He did not look at Diego. He looked at the giant wolf, his eyes filled with reverence and recognition that transcended the present moment. Finally, Raphael whispered, bowing his head low to the beast in a sign of deep respect. "I have found you." The silence in the ballroom was heavier than the debris from the shattered doors. Snow swirled outside, melting on the heated marble floors. But no one moved. No one dared to breathe. The silver wolf, a creature of myth and nightmares, hovered over the Alpha King. Its golden eyes, burning with ancient intelligence, pierced Rafael Santos. It did not attack. It did not advance. Instead, a low moan escaped its throat, a sound of recognition, of a soul finally finding an anchor in a storm. Slowly, the beast's massive legs began to tremble. The adrenaline that had fueled the transformation, the rage that had broken the seal, was fading, leaving behind catastrophic exhaustion. The silver wolf staggered, its massive form seeming to shimmer, the edges blurring like fog on the asphalt. "I've got you," Raphael murmured, his voice a low murmur that only she could hear. "You can let go, Catalina. You're safe now." How he knew her name was a mystery that would have to wait. The wolf collapsed. In midair, the magic dissolved. Bone and fur retracted, reshaping with sickly cracks that echoed in the silent hall. When the figure hit the ground, the monster was gone. In its place was Catalina, curled up in a fetal position, her skin glowing with a faint pearly sheen, shivering violently against the cold stone. Raphael moved with a speed that blurred the eyes. In one fluid motion, he took off his heavy winter coat and wrapped it around her, protecting her small, trembling form. He picked her up in his arms as if she weighed no more than a feather. Her head rested against his shoulder, unconscious but protected. It was then that Diego found his voice, desperate and pathetic. He took a step forward, declaring that Catalina was a member of his pack, that Raphael had no right to touch her. Raphael turned slowly to face Diego. He didn't shout. He didn't roar. He simply looked at Diego with eyes that were black wells of emptiness. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. His voice was dangerously calm when he questioned Diego's claim, reminding him that it had been less than 5 minutes since he had banished and rejected her. Diego stammered pathetic excuses, claiming he didn't know, that she seemed ill, that it had been a mistake. Now that she had transformed, he declared, the rejection could be rescinded. Raphael then exploded, his voice cracking like a whip through the air. The bond was broken. Diego had shattered it because she didn't fit his vision of a trophy wife for his vanity. Raphael pulled Catalina closer to his chest, her head resting against his shoulder. He declared that she was no longer the property of the Eclipse Moon Pack. A silver wolf owed allegiance to no common alpha. She answered only to the crown, and by the laws of the old code, as a banished wolf found by the king, she was now under his personal protection. Valentina, who had been cowering behind a pillar, stepped forward, her face twisted in ugly spite. She called Catalina a freak, a monster, claiming she would kill them all. Raphael's gaze turned to Valentina, and the Beta's daughter gasped, clutching her throat as if an invisible hand were squeezing it. Raphael turned back to the crowd, addressing the terrified dignitaries. This banquet was over, he announced. He declared that Diego's territory was under investigation for mistreatment of a royal bloodline. The threat hung in the air, heavier than a guillotine blade. Raphael summoned his guards. From the shadows of the balcony, 12 figures descended. They were the king's onyx guard, elite warriors dressed in tactical gear, their faces covered by masks, moving with lethal precision. They formed a perimeter around Raphael and Catalina, weapons at the ready. "We're leaving," Raphael declared. He turned and walked toward the destroyed entrance, his boots crushing the wood. He stepped out into the snow, carrying the unconscious girl who had been cleaning floors just hours ago, leaving the eclipse moon pack in ruins behind him. Catalina awoke to the smell of sandalwood and antiseptic. She wasn't freezing. In fact, she was warmer than she had ever been in her life. She was lying on a bed that felt like a cloud, covered with silk sheets so soft they felt like water against her skin. She sat up quickly, gasping. Pain exploded in her joints, the residual impact of her first transformation. Slowly, a deep voice calmed her. "Your bones are still settling." Catalina recoiled, pressing her back against the luxurious velvet headboard. Her eyes scanned the room. It was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a jagged, snow-capped mountain range she didn't recognize. A fire roared in a stone fireplace large enough to roast a deer. Sitting in a leather armchair near the fire was the man from the balcony, the Alpha King. Catalina's breath caught. She pulled the comforter up to her chin, her voice trembling as she asked where she was. Rafael stood up, wearing a casual gray sweater, looking less like a warlord and more like an ordinary man, although the scars running down the side of his neck suggested a violent past. "You are in Fortaleza del Norte," Rafael said. "My home." Catalina asked why she was there, if she was a prisoner, if she had hurt someone. Fragmented memories flashed in her mind, the pain, the rejection, the explosion of fur and rage. She looked at her hands. They were human again, but her nails were slightly longer, harder. "You are not a prisoner, Catalina," Rafael said, bringing her a glass of water from a crystal jug. He moved slowly, telegraphing his actions so as not to frighten her. "You are a guest and possibly the most important person on this continent right now." Catalina took the water with trembling hands. She didn't understand. Diego had rejected her. She was rabble, an omega. Rafael sat on the edge of the bed, keeping a respectful distance, and shook his head firmly. Omegas don't destroy reinforced oak doors. Omegas don't force an entire court of alphas to their knees with a single growl. He looked into her eyes, his expression intense. He asked if she knew who her parents were. Catalina recited the story she had been told 1,000 times. Her father was a warrior named Miguel, and her mother was a human named Rosa. They had died when she was a baby, in tragic circumstances. "Lies," Rafael said softly. Catalina blinked, confused. Rafael explained that Miguel was a warrior, yes, but he was not her father. He was her guardian. And Rosa was his mate. They had given their lives protecting her, not from ordinary bandits, but from a faction of fanatics known as the Purebloods. Rafael reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver medallion. He hung it from his finger, explaining that it had been found around Miguel's neck when his body was recovered. The former Alpha, Diego's father, had hidden it. He knew what she was and was terrified. Catalina looked at the medallion. It was engraved with a crescent moon intersected by a lightning bolt. Rafael explained that this was the crest of the Argentum lineage, the Silver Wolves. They were the original ruling class of their species, dating back 3,000 years. They were thought to be extinct. Their wolves were not limited by the pack hierarchy, Rafael continued. They were conduits for the raw power of the moon goddess. Catalina felt the room spin. She protested that she was just a cleaning girl, scrubbing toilets. But Rafael insisted that she had been suppressed, not naturally weak. "They fed you aconite in your food," Rafael said, his voice tinged with anger, not hers, but for her. "Small doses, just enough to keep your wolf in a coma. That was why you were weak. That was why you never transformed. The rejection, the emotional trauma, burned the poison from your system." Catalina set the water aside, her hands shaking too much to hold it. She asked why he was telling her this, what he wanted from her. Rafael leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "The purebloods were still out there," he explained. "If they found out she was alive, they would come after her. And Diego, his pride wounded, would try to claim her back, claiming it had all been a misunderstanding." Rafael acknowledged the humiliation Catalina had suffered. He promised Diego would regret it for the rest of his miserable life. But right now, she was untrained, a nuclear weapon without a guidance system. Her wolf was ancient and powerful, but she didn't know how to control it. If she lost control again, she could devastate an entire city. Rafael stood up and reached out a hand to her. He offered to teach her, to show her how to harness that power, to help her take her rightful place. Catalina looked at his hand. It was large, calloused, dangerous. Yet she felt the same attraction she had felt with Diego, but different. With Diego, the attraction had been a desperate need to please, to submit. With Rafael, it felt like a current of electricity, a challenge that called to something deep within her. "What if I don't accept?" she asked. Rafael simply replied that she was free to go. He would give her money, a new identity, and send her into the human world. She could live a normal life, but she would always be looking over her shoulder. And her wolf would eventually drive her mad if she wasn't released. Catalina closed her eyes. She thought of Valentina's contempt. She thought of the years sleeping in a closet. She thought of Diego's cold, gray eyes when he banished her to the snow. Something inside her roared, "Enough. No more kneeling. No more being invisible." Catalina opened her eyes. Her violet irises were streaked with gold. She reached out and took Rafael's hand, feeling the strength in that touch. "Teach me," she said, her voice firm and clear. "Teach me to take my place." Rafael smiled, a genuine and rare expression that transformed his stern face. "First," he said, pulling her up, "we need to find you some suitable clothes. Because tonight, the Council of Elders is coming. They sensed the surge of energy when you transformed, and they're coming to verify if the rumors are true." The Council, Catalina paled. The Council governed all werewolf laws. They were ancient, conservative, and unforgiving. Rafael guided her toward a massive closet filled with designer clothes that still had the tags on them. "Don't worry," he assured her. "You're with me now." But there was something she needed to know. Rafael paused, his hand on the doorframe. The silver wolf wasn't just powerful. According to prophecy, he was destined to choose a mate who would either unite the warring kingdoms or destroy them completely. Diego had rejected her. The bond was broken. But nature abhorred a vacuum. His wolf would soon be seeking a new mate. Suddenly, a siren began to sound throughout the fortress. Red lights flashed in the hallway. Rafael tapped an earpiece he was wearing, requesting a report. A frantic voice crackled over the line, loud enough for Catalina to hear with her keen senses. "Perimeter breach. It's the pack of the eclipsed moon. They've surrounded the south gate. Alpha Diego is demanding an audience. He claims we kidnapped his Luna." Rafael's jaw tightened. He looked at Catalina. "Seems your ex doesn't take rejection as well as he dishes it out." Catalina stepped forward, grabbing a black silk robe and wrapping it around herself. The fear was fading, replaced by a cold, smoldering anger. "Let him in," Catalina said, her voice surprising even herself. She glanced at the mirror, smoothing her hair. Her reflection looked different, sharper, more deadly. Let him see what he discarded. The throne room of Fortaleza del Norte was a cavernous hall carved directly into the living rock of the mountain. Stalactites as thick as tree trunks hung from the vaulted ceiling, catching the light of the burning torches. At the far end stood the obsidian throne, a seat of power that had remained empty for years until Rafael's return. Catalina stood at the base of the throne platform. She no longer wore the oversized t-shirt or maid's uniform. She wore a midnight blue velvet dress with a high collar, provided by the fortress staff. It hugged her form, highlighting the newfound strength in her posture. Her pale blonde hair was braided like a valkyrie, exposing the elegant curve of her neck. Rafael stood to her right, his presence a dark, protective wall. "Open the gates," Rafael commanded. The massive iron gates creaked as they swung open. Diego entered, flanked by Valentina's father and a dozen of his best warriors. Diego looked disheveled. His eyes were wild, rimmed with red. He stopped suddenly when he saw Catalina. For a moment, the arrogance fell from his face, replaced by pure astonishment. He had only seen her in grey rags covered in dirt. Now she looked like a queen. Catalina, Diego breathed, taking a step forward. Rafael warned him not to come any closer. Diego looked at Rafael with hatred burning in his grey eyes. He accused Rafael of stealing her, of taking advantage of a chaotic situation to kidnap his mate. Former mate, Catalina corrected. Her voice was calm, but it echoed through the hall with crystal clarity. Diego looked at her, his expression changing to a mask of manipulative pleading. He begged her to understand, claimed he was under pressure, that he had acted to protect the pack. You acted to protect your ego, Catalina corrected him, stepping down one step from the podium. You didn't just reject me, Diego. You humiliated me. You let Valentina belittle me. You threw me in the snow. Don't rewrite history just because you realize I have value now. Diego roared that it had been a mistake, that the rejection was invalid. He reached out, asking her to come home with him. He spoke of power, of how unstoppable they would be together. He promised to banish Valentina, to give her everything she ever wanted. Catalina looked at his outstretched hand. For a fleeting second, the old Catalina, the girl who just wanted to be loved, wavered. But then she felt the phantom pain of the cold ground against her face, heard the laughter echoing in her memory. I'm home, Catalina said, taking a step back toward Rafael. It was then that from the shadows beside the hall, 5 figures in grey robes emerged. The Council of Elders. They moved with supernatural stillness, their faces hidden beneath deep hoods. Diego paled and immediately bowed his head in respect. The leader, Elder Miguel, pulled back his hood. He was a man of indeterminate age, his face a map of wrinkles, his eyes completely white, blind, yet seeing everything. He declared that they had sensed the awakening. The Argentum bloodline had returned. Diego insisted that Catalina was his mate, claiming her under the law of first right. But Elder Miguel countered that he had rejected her under the law of force. However, he admitted that Diego raised a legal point. Since Catalina had not transformed at the moment of rejection, the severing of the bond was technically ambiguous. Rafael stepped forward, insisting that there was no confusion. But Elder Miguel raised a wrinkled hand, explaining that when the bond was disputed, there was only one way to settle the claim, a trial of honor. The room fell deathly silent. Diego smiled, a cruel, predatory smile returning to his face. He was one of the strongest fighters in the region, trained since childhood. He accepted immediately, declaring that he would fight for her. Elder Miguel asked who would fight for the girl, looking at Rafael. By law, she could choose a champion. Rafael began to step forward, but Catalina stopped him. No, she said. Rafael stopped, looking at her in surprise. He tried to argue that Diego was a trained fighter, that she had only transformed for the first time yesterday. But Catalina understood something crucial. If I let you fight for me, she whispered to Rafael, I will always be the weak Omega in their eyes. I will always be the girl who needs to be saved. She turned to the council, her chin raised. I do not choose a champion, Catalina announced, her voice sounding like a bell. I will fight him myself. Diego laughed, a genuine sound of disbelief. He scoffed that she did not even know how to retract her claws properly, that he would not fight her because he might hurt her. Then you forfeit, Catalina said coldly. Diego's smile vanished. He accepted the challenge arrogantly. Elder Miguel nodded solemnly. The challenge was issued and accepted. At dawn, in the circle of ice, until surrender or clear demonstration of superiority. The circle of ice was an ancient amphitheater located in a valley behind the fortress. The floor was a frozen lake, thick enough to support the weight of transformed beasts. When the sun rose, casting a reddish glow across the peaks. Catalina stood on the north side of the circle. She wore a tactical suit Rafael had given her, flexible, durable black fabric that allowed for complete transformation. She was barefoot on the ice, but she didn't feel the cold. The fire inside her burned too hot. On the south side, Diego took off his shirt, revealing a torso of hard muscle. He stretched, looking confident. Elder Miguel announced the rules: no weapons, no outside interference, transformation allowed. The fight ended when one wolf surrendered or demonstrated clear superiority. Rafael stood at the edge of the barrier, his knuckles white as he gripped the railing. "Remember what I told you," he projected his voice for Catalina to hear. "He's strong, but arrogant. He fights with anger. You fight with instinct. Use his weight against him." Diego didn't transform immediately. He wanted to humiliate her in human form first. He charged across the ice, moving with terrifying speed, aiming for a blow to her face, a move of disrespect, not a deadly blow. But Catalina didn't block. She dodged. Her movement was fluid, faster than humanly possible. As Diego's hand sliced through the empty air where her head had been, she buried her fist in his solar plexus. It wasn't a trained punch. It was raw power. Diego recoiled on the ice, clutching his chest, eyes wide. "Not so weak now, are you?" Catalina taunted. Diego's face turned purple with rage. He roared and his body exploded into motion. Bones cracked and reshaped. Within seconds, a massive black wolf stood on the ice, growling with saliva dripping from its jaws. That he didn't hesitate, lunging toward her. Catalina closed her eyes. "Come on," she whispered to the beast within. "With pleasure," the ancient voice replied. A flash of blinding silver light burst from her body. When the light faded, the silver wolf was on the ice. She was larger than Diego, more elegant, her fur not just white but resembling liquid mercury. Diego collided with her, but it was like running into a stone wall. Catalina didn't move. She took the impact and then grabbed his shoulder with her jaws, not to seriously injure him, but to demonstrate control. Diego thrashed wildly, trying to fight back, but she shook him off and tossed his massive weight aside as if it were light. Diego slid across the ice, struggling to regain his balance. He looked at her with genuine fear now. She was a superior predator. As they circled, Catalina could sense his every move, anticipate every attack. When he tried to strike her from behind, she spun around and pinned him to the ice with her paws, her claws not piercing but restraining. Her golden eyes met his. Catalina's inner voice screamed to end the threat, but she looked into Diego's eyes and saw only a small, pathetic man who used power to hide his insecurity. Defeating him completely would be easy. But she didn't need to destroy him. Just show him that he could never control her again. Catalina released her throat, placing a heavy paw on his snout, gently pressing his head against the ice. The order was not spoken. It was a psychic wave: surrender. Diego whimpered, his tail between his legs. He stood still, exposing his neck. He was finished. Catalina stepped back, transforming back into human form. Rafael had already leaped the barrier, wrapping a cloak of fur around her before the crowd could look. "I surrender," Diego gasped, returning to human form. "She is yours." "She was never yours to give," Rafael said, supporting Catalina. Elder Miguel rose from the stands, declaring the trial complete. Catalina had demonstrated her strength and choice. Diego's claim was null and void. Suddenly, another siren began to sound. Rafael tapped his earpiece again. "Breach on the north wall. They're wearing silver masks. The purebloods had found her." Rafael looked at Catalina, torn. "She can fight," Catalina said, pushing her exhaustion down. "Give me a position where I can help." What followed was a battle where Catalina demonstrated her true power, not through destruction, but through protection. When the purebloods attacked, she did not seriously injure them. Instead, she used her strength to create silver energy barriers, protecting the innocent. She summoned beams of light that disarmed her enemies without causing fatal injuries, causing them to retreat in fear of her power. The leader of the purebloods, Valerius, attempted to use a sonic device to incapacitate her, but Catalina walked through the waves as if they were a gentle breeze. With a wave of her hand, she deactivated the device and lifted Valerius into the air through telekinetic force, not to hurt him, but to demonstrate that he had no power over her. When he was released, Valerius and his followers fled, terrified by the divinity before them, vowing never to return. The battle ended not with death, but with surrender. The enemies fled, and Catalina fell to her knees, exhausted but triumphant. Rafael held her, and Diego, watching from afar with his ribs sore but unbroken, finally understood that he had lost long before that day. 3 months later, the former mansion of the eclipse moon pack was renamed Santuario Argentum. But on that day, the entire kingdom was gathered at the Fortaleza del Norte. Catalina stood on the balcony overlooking the vast courtyard, wearing a white silk dress embroidered with silver thread, and on her head rested a braided moonstone crown. Behind her, Valentina knelt, adjusting the train of her dress. The once arrogant Beta now served the court she had mocked, stripped of rank but given a second chance at redemption through honest service. Raphael stepped out to join Catalina, looking regal. He took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "Ready?" he asked. "Always," Catalina smiled. They stepped forward together. Below, thousands of wolves from every pack on the continent fell silent, then erupted in deafening cheers. "I present to you," Raphael's voice thundered, "Queen Catalina, the silver wolf, my mate." Catalina looked out at the sea of faces. At the distant tree line, she saw a lone black wolf watching, Diego. He gave a single nod of respect, turned, and disappeared into the forest, finally free of his arrogance. Catalina squeezed Raphael's hand, feeling the unbreakable bond vibrating between them. The rabble had disappeared. The Omega was a memory. The queen had risen, not through violence, but through strength, wisdom, and the courage to claim her true power. And the entire court bowed, not out of fear, but out of respect.